Hi everybody. For this session of Daniel San Waxes On, I want to answer a question. This is a question of the week. So I have students, as we all know, I think by now, I have students of all abilities. I have students of all physical abilities, and I have students, wheelchairs, walkers, just fine motor issues, just the whole gamut. I got athletes. And real nimble athletes that, they play soccer, they do all sorts of high school sports, little league sports, and I've got students that have cerebral palsy and they're in a wheelchair or a walker, and I got everything in between. And one of the things we do here is we train everybody on the floor together. So that involves modified curriculum, and I don't want to go too much into that because I've talked about it a bunch of times. The question was, and it was a very intelligent question, if my martial art and the way I teach it is mobility based, and it is, it's mobility based. If it's mobility based, how do you adapt something mobility based for someone in a wheelchair? Is it mobility walking and running and jumping and spinning and turning? How do you do that for somebody in a walker, right? That's a great question. It's an outstanding question. It requires a couple of things. One is expanding your idea of what mobility is, and if you stay focused on self-defense, whereas technique is, we always say at the worst, technique and self-defense is what works, right? Not necessarily the prettiest, but is it efficient and effective enough to work? Because self-defense is ugly. Once you actually get into a fight, it looks ugly. It doesn't look like the movies, right? I think we all know that. Okay, so here we are talking about logistics, movement, stepping patterns, moving around. But you also notice when I teach self-defense, when I teach mobility first, I teach not just footwork, but I teach changing levels. I teach dropping, getting low, getting high, moving out. I teach parries and leans and ducks and boxing techniques like the parries and the weave and the bob. All of that is logistics and mobility. Mobility is not just the feet. So when I talk about mobility based and we have to adapt for someone who's in a wheelchair, we talk all the time about how with the wheelchair, you have to be very, very, very careful about distance because you want to leave, but you're using your hands often to move your wheels, which means your hands are here, which is the wrong place for them to be in self-defense, right? Yeah, walker, you need a walker to move, your hands are locked in here, wrong place to be for self-defense. Not to mention, your lower leg mobility is non-existent to severely limited to the point where you can't hope to be as mobile as your opponent. So how do we maintain our theory of mobility trumps everything else? We do it with, you have to look at the real world. One, don't overpromise and underdeliver. Underpromise and overdeliver, right? Don't say, I'm going to teach you these techniques so that you can defeat anybody, even though you have, even though you're in a walker or you're using crutches, or have to say, look, you are at a disadvantage. You might have to bust your butt as hard as you can just to get to the level of an untrained person with no mobility issues. But here's where the other things start to happen. Let's work with what we do have for mobility. Let's work with our core. Let's work with our spinal column. Let's make sure we've got that kind of mobility, that very, very important mobility, because that's going to help you generate power in your strikes and blocks, as well as get out of the way. Because ultimately, what is mobility? Mobility is the ability to get out of the way in self-defense. It's also the ability to close and remove yourself from danger, close into the opponent, so that you're within tactical range to deliver damage. But it's also, at its essence, martial arts self-defense is about not getting hurt. You don't want to get hurt. We always say, in the wild, when animals fight, there are three outcomes. Animal A kills animal B kills animal A. Animal A kills animal B, but then dies itself. Okay? One survives, the other survives, or both die. There is, of course, the survival, but in self-defense, that sounds too good to be true, so we don't talk too much about it. So, anyway, we always say that you can kill your opponent can kill you, or you can kill each other. Two of those answers are horrible. Only one of those answers is acceptable. So it's about avoiding harm as much as you can. So we don't just do lip service for avoidance and getting away and maintaining distance and leaving, but we also talk about, all right, you've got to do something else. You're not going to run away from this guy, and when he closes, you're going to have to put your hands up, so your mobility is going to be compromised. You're going to have to keep at least one hand up and maybe spin the chair, but you've got to have the mobility of the trunk, the shoulders, and the arms, and the neck, and the head. So we spend a lot of time working on those so that whether they're in a chair or whether they're in a walker, they have the ability to strengthen as much as they can and have the suppleness to move their body in a swaying or movement pattern in dropping levels and changing levels. Is it ideal? Of course not. It's not ideal. Are we going to teach these people, these students, to be able to avoid punches like a professional boxer does when he's up against somebody who's completely outclassed? No, of course not. What we are going to do is work on the idea of mitigating damage, rolling with punches, ducking, dodging, diving, weaving, parrying, and using these parries. Especially with seated students, we work on strength, like brute physical conditioning of the arms and upper body. Get strong. You can be strong in your upper body if you've got the ability to be strong. Get strong. Because if that person comes after you and you've got really strong upper body, when that grab comes in or that fist comes in, if you can get out of the way, you can use your mobility to lessen the strike or flow off whatever you're doing with your parries and whatever it is that's going to be happening. If you get that grab and you're really strong, we always joke, if you've got those Popeye forearms from pushing that chair around and you get a hold of that guy, it's a whole different game now. And so we have to adjust and adapt and modify what we can and can't do, and we have to work to our strengths and try to mitigate or eliminate your opponent's strengths as best you can. Sound familiar? Sounds like self-defense to me. Sounds like the same thing we teach everybody. Sounds like the same thing we teach the 5'2" female who's worried about an abusive ex that's 6'3", and we start talking about how you're at disadvantages. And as of course in self-defense we always talk about assume your opponent is bigger than and stronger than you and train that way. So we say, okay, if you don't have the mobility to run away, you don't have the mobility to move around and dance and get in and out in the event of an altercation, then let's work on the other mobilities. Make sure you don't get hit really hard, make sure there's no significant blow. If they're trying to hit you, they are close enough to be hit or grabbed back, then do it. Get in there, use your strengths, which should be physical strength of the upper body, and your understanding of primary targets and vital targets, and work to end that fight as fast as you can. But the mobility still comes first. If you don't get out of the way of the punch, there is no further fight. You lost. So there's your answer. When we talk about mobility, and we talk about mobility for those with physical or mobility limitations, we talk about maximizing what they can do. It doesn't do a whole lot of good to talk about what they can't do. Okay, I'm 51. There's a lot I can't do anymore, but I'm not going to worry about it. I can't do it. I'm going to focus on what I can do, and I'm going to try to develop that and get better and better and better at it. So I'm going to maximize my potential weapons so that I can minimize their advantages. It's the same thing. You just got to think a little bit outside the box.